Welcome everybody to Monday, December 1st meeting of the school committee. We will call the meeting to order and we will stand for our Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Welcome back. Hope everybody had a nice, restful Thanksgiving. Ready to hit the festive season with a bang. And we will start with our consent agenda for the evening, which is jam-packed, as you can see. So, motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favour? Okay, we have a 6-0 unanimous. Swiftly moving on to our public comment this evening. Oh, just a reminder as well, this meeting is being recorded and being broadcast on WestfordCAT. If you do have a comment to make, please try and keep your comments within 2 minutes and mention your name. We don't think we have anybody in the room or online. Nope. Okay. And so we'll swiftly move on to informational updates. Looking for a student input first.
Cinderella finished up last week. It was very successful. There's a lot of little kids, a lot of cute pictures. And the football team beat Acton Boxborough again on Thanksgiving, but by less than last year.
The school counseling department started their annual 12-day self-care challenge, and the holiday bazaar is this Saturday at WA.
Awesome. Super. Thank you. Moving on to our superintendents.
I'll just add that Blanchard Middle School's Performing Arts will be presenting Freaky Friday this week, and performances are scheduled to start on Thursday and will last until Saturday. So it's a family-friendly event, and all are welcome.
We certainly hope that everyone had a wonderfully relaxing Thanksgiving. I did send out my December update earlier this afternoon, which had a bunch of information in it. For anyone tuning in right now, curious about tomorrow's weather forecast.
What's the tea?
I'm tempted to wait until after we do the budget presentation so that they'll wait for the whole meeting.
Yeah.
But we will be sending out, I'll be sending out an email at about 7:30 tonight, basically telling people we don't have enough information yet as to tomorrow.
It's very mixed.
Yeah, it's mixed. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what there is. But I do want people to know that we're going to continue to use that. If we have to make morning announcements, and I will say I am not a fan of the morning announcements. I don't like them. I would love to be able to make those decisions ahead of time, but we'll still do them at the same time that we have done in the past, even though we've changed the school times. So I'll be sending an email later on. It's already scheduled to go to give people that information. But I do hope if you were just paying attention for that purpose that you stick around the MCAS and the budget and the updated CD policy.
Yeah.
Lots of great things on tonight's agenda. Yeah.
Awesome. And that's it?
That's it.
Okay, short and sweet. School committee, any updates?
Just want to send a congratulations to all of our fall athletes. Seasons have finished up over the last few weeks. I think a special shout out needs to go to Abby Hennessy.
Yeah.
She finished as the #1 female runner in the state, and she also won this past weekend's Brooks Northeast Cross Country Championship in Franklin Park in Boston. And from what I understand, she's going to nationals in 2 weeks in San Diego. So incredible feat for Abby. Today is the first day of school after Thanksgiving. That means the winter season has begun as a former student athlete myself. So good luck to all our students across the district who's preparing for their seasons. So
next round. Yeah, she was featured in a news piece
yes,
recently
yeah,
on the local news. It was
NBC.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
it was awesome. And anybody else?
Just a quick
Yeah.
Robinson School Building Committee update. A subset of the committee worked on the designer request for services, which is that next piece of the design team. We have the OPM, the owner's project manager, and next will be the architect design firm.
Again, all very prescribed steps by the MSBA, but that first step is by putting out our RFS, like an advertisement that we're hiring somebody, and that has been vetted by a working group of the Robinson School Building Committee, and will be slated for approval next week, so that's before our next meeting. So I just wanted to share that update. Again, that timeline is really that team wouldn't be sort of fully formed until probably March, and then that's when things will kick into a much higher gear.
Awesome. Thanks, Val. And I just want to remind people, I know, Anya, you mentioned on it that the holiday bazaar is on this Saturday, and just to let people know, the school committee are going to be there in some shape or form. We'll make it work. So if you're there, come say hi. It's from 9 to 3, so always a busy one. Okay, so moving on, we will start with Courtney on the MCAS update.
Great. Tonight I'll be joined remotely by some of our curriculum coordinators. Chris Jeffcoat will be available, Erin Hogan will be available, as well as Janet Kirstead. And I did share with them that we were probably going to be on at 7:20. We're a little bit ahead of time.
Right.
Yay for us, but we'll get started anyway. So, we'll put that in the slideshow, I think. Yeah, great. So MCAS, as we know, is the comprehensive assessment system that is used by Massachusetts. Students are tested in grades 3 through 8, and grade 10 for English language arts and in math. And in grade 5 and 8, students are evaluated in science and civics for grade 8 only at this time. Additionally, science is also administered at the high school level, either in the 9th grade or 10th grade. Typically for our students, it's in the 9th grade following biology, but there might be instances where that might be 10th grade. So MCAS was a very big subject last year when we both reported out, as well as just the timing because of the November ballot that did take place in 2024. And what's important to note is that although the competency determination element of MCAS did go away, MCAS did not. And that's why, as a committee last year, in the spring, you all came up with some graduation requirements, came up with a new policy that addressed some of the competency determination. You will also be hearing later on tonight some further discussion about competency determination, because it needs to be updated according to the state. And then, not to complicate anything any further, but just today, there was a new release by Governor Healy. So the Healy administration released new statewide requirements or guidelines, which will be vetted out through this school year and possibly implemented at the following year. This new framework may, in fact, include some phasing out of MCAS, especially at the 10th grade level. And so that's just all preliminary information, and we will just keep our head on a swivel and continue to look at that. But regardless, MCAS is still used by each district to reflect on teaching the state standards. It is, always was, meant to be a barometer of how each district is doing with state standards. MCAS is also still used as a measure for determining some scholarships that are afforded to high school students. And it's also still used as a measure for the seal of biliteracy expectations. And so those are some important elements that have not changed as part of, regardless of the November 2024 ballot question. So moving on to some of our information, the state gives us a tremendous amount of information when it comes to MCAS, and how each district looks at it, dives into it, analyzes it is really quite unique, I think, for each district. And what's important is that we are always continuing to look at how is this informing our instruction, and is it complementing our intervention model? So in the next slide, you'll start to see some of the analysis that we have showed you. This is a snapshot of the MCAS for grade 10. And it's a 4-year snapshot that you're looking at. On the bar graphs, it's talking about how our district has done in exceeding expectations and meeting expectations, which is in the blue and green, as well as partially meeting expectations and then not meeting expectations in the orange and red. In the bottom chart, you can see how that correlates to the state. So when we look at our information, some of the strengths that are showing up to be consistent with English language arts includes language conventions, foundational comprehension in terms of locating evidence, making inferences, and analyzing symbols. Students scoring very well on grammar and usage. And essay scores for language were also very strong. Now, as much as I say essay were strong, there were some elements of the essay that we did lose some points on. And I believe that an earlier question that was presented to me did point out that we did have a dip in 78% of exceeding and meeting standards this year, opposed to the last 3 years where we were looking at 84%, 87%, 88%, and now we've dipped down to a 78%. When Janet Kirstead took a deeper look at this, there did seem to be a correlation between the students not doing as well in the meeting and partially meeting portion of the essay. So more students in that lower range either wrote something that was off topic or was much briefer than what would have been expected. Now, certainly don't want to blame the November ballot on everything. However, there were some evidences that some students might not have taken it quite that serious. We are able to look at what those essays are, and so, one example was change the hat rule, yo. Nah, I'm not writing this. I hate this. And then a student, which I really love, said, I really, really tried hard on my essay last session, but it took 2 hours to complete, just the writing portion of my test. This is why I feel discouraged to answer this writing prompt. I believe it's unrealistic to evaluate students on their ability to completely curate 3 separate essays, although there's probably scientific reasoning behind this decision to enforce 3 essays. I do not think 3 essay prompts are necessary. And so that was a very nicely constructed way of saying no, thank you very much. And this student scored 7 out of 8 on the other 2 that they had completed. And this one, they just said, no, thank you. I'm tired right now. So there's certainly an element of, is this going to count or is this not going to count? That might have played into it.
Which is something that we can appreciate, and yet at the same time, our data is indicating that we did not perform as well. So I think that's something that the state needs to look at and realize that there is a problem with the structure that they've created.
Well, and how do we combat that moving forward? Now that it's not a graduation requirement, is that going to be the mentality? Not that we want that to be our student mentality, but might that be a mentality of more kids than it would have been previously? And how do we?
That's a much bigger conversation. and is connected to the report, the initial report that was released today about the future graduation requirements.
And also, to your point, is a statewide problem. It's not a Westford problem.
To see the state marks dip from 58%, 58% to 57% to 51% this past year in the exceeding or meeting expectations group. A 6% drop is pretty substantial across the state too. So, some things to figure out.
So it's definitely a variable that was in play. You know, I think that some of our students who were still really reaching for that scholarship or for the seal of biliteracy, or where they were just trying to do their very, very best, continued to go down that road. There were others that certainly felt like this isn't for me.
Thank you for looking into that.
Janet, I see that you're on. Is there anything that you want to add?
No, I think you summarized it quite well.
Thank you. So in taking a look at mathematics in grade 10, we had some very nice strengths as far as geometry, mathematical functions, algebraic reasoning. Weaknesses were noted in the data and probability standards. And this is something for us to reflect on as far as what timing are we presenting those data and probability standards. And it's also something that we saw when we start talking about the elementary standards as well. We saw that pop up there. Again, when we look at the 4-year data across, we also see a bit of a dip in 2025, where the exceeding in the meeting was at 80%, 82%, 85%, and now a 78%. And I see Dr. Jeffcoat joined us. Is there anything, Chris, that you would like to add?
No, not unless anyone has any questions.
Not yet, so hold that thought. They might come up.
Courtney, is there did any of the scores to meet those levels change? I know that can change from year to year.
That's a good question.
What meets exceeding or meeting expectations or partially meeting? I know those indicators have changed. The
state
score
bar?
ranges
Yeah.
for those areas have changed year to year, especially following COVID.
They did. I don't believe that they made any changes this year, but they have made those changes. And that might be something that either Aaron, Chris, or Janet might be able to speak more specifically to, because I don't believe that any of those metrics were adjusted this year, unless they know that they were.
Seeing head nods.
You're seeing head nods. They're in agreement that there was nothing changing. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, not in math this year. The score needed for an exceeding in a meeting was the same as it was last year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question.
For grade 10 science, on our next slide, we're seeing again a small dip in the percentages that are meeting and exceeding, going from 86%, 85%, 87% to 78%. Despite this dip, we continue to do very well as compared to our state counterparts, consistently scoring well above the state with cell structure and functioning. Genetics is also a very stable performance, and evolution and the natural selection items remain very high performing in this area. Areas for improvement, although still above state averages, include the ecology and the ecosystems, that this is an opportunity for us to improve on here. Looking at the elementary and middle school data, this is grouped from grades clustered 3 through 8. And we are seeing a lot of consistency. The elementary didn't seem to have much of a dip the way we saw the dip at the high school level. So perhaps this is just our elementary students just plugging away, giving it their best, and not necessarily thinking about it in terms of high school graduation. So the strengths here that we are noticing is analyzing character motivation, inferential reasoning skills, and a strong ability to connect visual elements and contextual context. The areas for the improvement are on grammatical knowledge, indicating areas that we need for targeted instruction focus across all grade levels there. Now, just when you think that things are going to remain consistent, Erin has shared with us, and has been part of some planning meetings, that next spring, not this spring, but the spring of '27, as long as MCAS remains at that point, there will be some design changes. And although some of our writing elements were a bit lower, here it looks like we're looking at shorter reading passages for the students at some grade levels. Some other design elements will be reducing the amount of time students are actually spending on writing, introducing standalone select response questions that are not necessarily associated with a passage. And in these, that they will be assessing grade level language standards. So still, those design elements are still being worked on, and will be vetted out and, if approved, coming in the spring of 2027. And
Courtney, do you want me to take, do you want to take questions now on ELA, or are you moving on
sure,
to?
if you,
I'm just curious more specifically, I know and maybe Erin can speak to it, looking at some of the more specific numbers and say kind of that 3rd to 5th grade, with the ELA numbers. You know, for example, the current 5th graders, or what would have been 5th grade in 2025 spring, we've gone from 71 in 2021 down to 55 in 2025 of either meeting or exceeding expectations. And kind of again, in general, our 3rd graders, you know, kind of we've seen a kind of a slight decline over the last kind of 4 years. And I'm just kind of wondering specifically, I know we brought in UFly, I know we're doing EL, and based on kind of what you were saying there was talk about writing. I'm just curious, is it the writing that's, you know, are these, I know we're doing a lot of work on parts of it and we're seeing that coming through in our dibbles, but that kind of seems to specifically look at the reading. Is the curriculum and what we're doing in the classroom strong enough in the writing pieces, you know, if, based on kind of what you were pulling out for,
later on, we're going to talk a little bit more around the correlation between our universal screeners
okay,
and the MCAS to see
Okay.
how they're complementing or not complementing.
Yeah.
But you are correct that our universal screeners are really focusing on the reading element
Yeah.
and not so much the writing development.
Yeah.
Erin, I don't know if you want to chime in on any of that, if you heard the question.
Yes, absolutely. So, yes, I would say definitely in every grade level, the essays or the writing is where we score the lowest. When tracking the numbers across the years, we have seen dips, but when we track the cohorts, we did see a dip during COVID, and especially those kids who were in 5th grade, students who were in 5th grade last year, they didn't benefit from the foundational reading skills curriculum that we have now. And they also learned to read either online or wearing masks. So we definitely saw a dip in that particular cohort. There was a slight increase from them in 4th grade to those students in 5th grade. So with the writing piece, yes, EL focuses a lot on writing and gives them a very specific way of going about it that is consistent across the grade levels. They did tell us when we implemented that it takes about 3 to 5 years for us to see it generalized to standardized testing. And I will say, with the changes coming in 2027, I think we'll see it even more, because the focus is going to be on writing in response to text, which is what we do a lot more of in the classroom now. So I think we'll see, I hope and expect to see results from that. And also for the foundational skills, the students who have had consistent, UFly consistently are coming of age now to take MCAS. So I'm interested to see if we see a correlation there as well.
Erin, do you mind if I just ask one other question, a follow-up on that? Do we then have any way of our own internal district assessing of our own writing at the elementary level at all? Or are we just getting MCAS data?
Well, so EL does have mid and end of unit assessments, so the students are taking those. We haven't had teachers report out on them yet because they're not like standardized and normed, but because we have this consistent curriculum now, we can start to move towards looking at student work, but we haven't collected individual classroom or student data on that at this time.
Okay, thanks, Erin.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a question on the difference between 2021 and 2022? There's a big drop-off there, which I know COVID happened around that time, but wouldn't you expect the drop-off to be at the 2021 scores? Why was there?
I'm not looking at the 2021 scores, I'm looking at the 2022.
Oh, sorry.
That was,
Catherine
I did
provided
share
us
it
with
with
a few
Record
extra
as well.
years. Yeah.
What grade level is that?
It's across the board
Oh,
for ELA, for,
Did they change the, did they change the, like, you know, how Bill was asking
Assessment was changed,
Yeah.
and as was
The
the
kind of
metrics as to
yeah.
how they were scoring things, and I don't remember
Yeah.
which year that was.
I think it was that year because students were allowed to take that test in 2021, like virtually.
Right.
Yeah.
And they made it significantly smaller that year.
That's
Yeah.
true.
That was a significantly reduced test for that year. There may have only been one writing sample, and it was significantly reduced at the 3 to 8 level.
so that kind of kept the scores bolstered, and then in 2022, when it returned to
yeah.
the regular format, it
Yeah,
sort of
I think so,
okay.
yeah.
I would say we might be remiss to not talk about budget cuts in this conversation. I know MCAS is not an end-all be-all to judge our children, and, you know, standardized testing can be difficult for a lot of our students, but you can see that the variation in the dip is significantly higher in the lower elementary grades, which is where we've been doing the most cuts over the last 3 or 4 budget cycles. And we're not seeing as many at middle school and high school, which really saw the most significant cuts to their learning structures this year. So I think you're talking about missing support staff that we've cut over the years that are doing reading interventionalists, writing interventionalists, math interventionalists. I can't tell you there's a direct correlation, but also I think we would be remiss to not think that there's some correlation to when you start cutting support staff and teachers and you're putting more children in classrooms, there's less targeted learning, and that's going to impact
We're
their
going to address that a
educational
little
output.
bit later on in terms of it just being an MTSS model, rather than like how those budget cuts might have played into that MTS model, where the strengths and weaknesses, and then where we're hoping to go with that to improve and kind of map out what's an ideal situation and where we are at this point.
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal the thunder.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so in mathematics at grades 3 to 8, we're seeing pretty steady achievement across the board. The numbers in operations are consistently strong. Geometry shows stable performance in grades 3 to 8. The algebraic reasoning becomes a major strength by the time the students are hitting 7th and 8th grade, which is great because it really indicates a strong readiness for Algebra 1. Some of the areas of improvement, the one that was also noted with 10th grade was the data and statistics. and then also ratios and proportionality reasoning in percents. So although this is still an area that we're scoring better than the state, there had been a slight drop from last year. So when we see some of these areas that really are pointing to some of those higher standards or clusters, that's where we can really look at what are we doing, where are we teaching those elements within each one of our classes. MCAS Science is just 5th grade and 8th grade. And here, again, we see some consistency from 23, 24, and 25. Physical science is our most persistent challenge across both the 5th grade and the 8th grade, with strengths in life science, earth and space science, and engineering and technology. So there were 2 slides that I added this afternoon that was not shared with you previously before the holiday started, and that was around our subgroups. And in each one of these slides, I'm just giving you a sampling of some of the information that the state provides to each district and how we decide to drill them down, right? So some of the subgroups, clearly we have our high needs category, and in the high needs category, that includes our ELL students, our students with disabilities, and our low income. Additional categories that they decipher out would be race, gender, foster care, and homelessness. And so this is just an example of grade 3. If I were to paper you with each grade level in each content, it would be overwhelming amount of numbers to look at. This is really the analysis that has to happen at the school level, because as you can imagine, with each one of these students that are identified in here, you have individual students with very unique strengths and weaknesses, some more significant challenges than others. And so this is where the team approach at the school level really has to embrace what this data is saying. And when we talk about MCAS, it's probably the least incidental compared to all the other data that we have on our students who might have a disability or ELL or any other category. And so a lot of times when we're thinking about our students with special needs who are participating in MCAS, we are constantly analyzing what they're getting for scores. That happens during their regular annual IEP meetings. We're also talking about what are the accommodations, what are the standard accommodations that the student receives on an ongoing, regular basis in school in order to demonstrate their proficiency, and what might be a non-standard accommodation that that child needs in order to demonstrate some type of proficiency. And so we're really looking at the long game when it comes to special education, because prior to last year, we were thinking this is about graduation, right? The MCAS is about making sure that, 1, we're teaching to the standards, and 2, students have that competency determination in order to gain a diploma. And so when we look at it from that perspective, if you looked at these numbers, someone might say, whoa, you're going to have a lot of students who won't meet the mark for graduation. But that's not the case with us at all. We have a very high performing district in special education. There's a lot of work that is done between the time somebody is a grade 3 English language arts, which is this snapshot, and the time that they are actually taking that test for graduation. And so, typically we have everybody that's passing or a very low number who doesn't pass. In 2024, we had one student who was not able to demonstrate competency determination because of MCAS scores, but because that individual had passed all their courses and had demonstrated through our coursework, and because the ballot question went the way it did, we were able to go back and award that student with a high school diploma. And so that was good for her. Clearly, we don't have any information to share with you now about 2025 because that was a moot point. But I guess what I'm trying to say within this piece of information, that there is just a plethora of information, and somebody can get lost in all of that analyzation. When you look at foster care and homelessness, those are our transient populations who may or may not be with us in the subsequent years. And so it's very challenging to always, compare apples to apples in that respect. Our next slide shows some of our students who take the MCAS Alt. The MCAS Alt is a completely different assessment system, and what happens in this situation is that a special education team makes a determination that the student is unable to perform in a regular paper pencil type test on a regular basis, but has the ability to demonstrate that they know the standards. And so a portfolio is put together for students who might qualify for this MCAS Alt. In order to do so, they're recommended on an IEP, and the families sign off with consent, agreeing that their student will participate in an MCAS Alt opposed to the regular MCAS. This is a tremendous amount of work on our staff, and so I never mention MCAS Alt without thanking the special education teachers who spend hours and hours collecting information and really presenting it to the state so that we can demonstrate some proficiency. Here, it looks like we had about 22 students who did participate. That's about 2.3% of our population that did participate in MCAS Alt. Of that, 59% were showing progressing, 32% emerging, and 9% incomplete. There could be many different reasons why that incomplete is the way it is. It could be based on the student's attendance. It could be based on the teacher that's putting the portfolio together about what may or may not have been available at that time to demonstrate. So there's a couple different things that might play into that incomplete. Are there any questions about?
Is this typically high school? I know it says all grades, but
This is all grades.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know if it's just anecdotally, is it distributed among grades or?
You know, our hope is that all students in grade 3 are taking the regular MCAS to have that opportunity. There are some of our students who we know are not able to do that at all, and so they might come out right away in third grade recommending an MCAS Alt. But we do like to have that opportunity for students to use the standard accommodations and the non-standard accommodations prior to going to MCAS Alt. And not all the time will you have a student participate in every single discipline for the MCAS Alt. There could be a situation where they might be able to demonstrate in math, but when it comes to English language arts, that would be a perfect place where the student would require a portfolio rather than the traditional method.
Is there something about the math portfolio that's just logistically more challenging? Because we've got about 50% of kids, it looks like, have incomplete. No, I'm sorry, 30%, but still, it's a little higher.
I'm not 100% sure what might be leading to that.
As an administrator of special
So say
ed
you can speak to
teachers,
that, yeah.
sometimes it's as simple as one data point or element missing out of an entire year that will cause that team to mark it as an incomplete. it's a pretty rigorous process, and I know my former teachers would take a couple sessions, multiple hours at a time, just to prepare. You could take your portfolios in and have them reviewed mid-year. It was a very rigorous process, so.
There's just one thing I wanted to note that maybe we might keep in mind for next year when we're talking about the subgroups. You know, specifically when we're talking about students with disabilities, that's quite a large number of 450 students, and I know we're talking about how we can drill down into those numbers on a school basis and a student-by-student basis, but just looking at the numbers, I think we had 454 students with disabilities I'm looking at the generic grades 3 to 8 of ELA, just as a data point, and I'm seeing that we have 79% of those students either partially or not meeting those expectations, the MCAS thing. And when we say students with disabilities, you know, I know there's a whole gamut of students in there, but I would be interested to kind of get some, maybe a deeper dive into that kind of look at some point, because some of those students are just, they have class with like ADHD or dysgraphia or dyslexia, so it's not necessarily saying that there's a cognitive IQ issue, but I'm just, it would be interesting to see why the numbers are so high in kind of within that area. Because it is looking at the numbers as well from last year, it was 83% again, so it seems to be quite a high area of specifically within that area. And I know we try and talk about our tier, I know we have our MTSS, but a lot of those students I know we try to have, you know, inclusive in the classroom, and so it would be interesting to maybe drill down into that a bit more to see, are there classroom practices that would help those students maybe more. I don't know, it's just a thought I think would be worth kind of diving into at some point.
Right.
A bit
And
more.
I think that that's all, you know, in how much weight do you want to give each one of our assessments? Because when we look at a student that might have a disability, there's so much information that's informing us
Yeah.
in how they're doing it. And I guess if the goal is in grade 3 to be meeting expectations for everybody, then, you know, that might be a student that might not even have a disability. So
It's also,
it's
the
tricky.
grade 3 is difficult. I mean, I think looking at it over time, and it's kind of to what Courtney was saying, the fact that we have this range of students who start in one place, and then at the end, we know that the vast majority of them are meeting the standards. And one of the things that I think we do well is that we're not teaching to the test.
Yes, which I
So we are
appreciate,
not
yeah.
spending K to 2
Yeah.
preparing students to take MCAS.
Yeah.
So for many students, this is the first time that they're kind of experienced something like that. And so and I think there's just a natural aspect to that performance that isn't something that we want to lean into preparing them to take this test.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think, I was just looking at more that it was the range from 3 to 8, because I suppose really what I would find interesting is more once you get to 8th grade and you've had that, you know, time to kind of get that input and really, is it making a difference, or, you know, because it just still seems a bit high.
And where we can use this,
Yeah.
to Courtney's point, where we can use this as a data point
Yeah.
in comparison to the other assessments that we have,
Yeah.
that's where it's really,
Yeah.
I think, most valuable to say, okay, are these consistent? Is there something that this is telling us that's different than something else?
I was just kind of putting it out there that it might be an interesting conversation to have, you know, to kind of maybe get a bit more in the weeds sometimes with the MCAS, because we do know that, you know, with the other information on a high level thing, we're getting quite good feedback, but I often find it's the smaller numbers and those kiddos who need more support that maybe, because if you're catching it for them, we know we're helping typically everybody else as well,
Right.
so, yeah.
maybe we can talk about that after, and so we can make sure that we're capturing that information that you're looking for.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. Yeah.
If I could interject really quickly.
Absolutely, George, you wanna?
Coach,
Sure.
Hi, folks.
Thanks, George.
Just to add some context to this too,
Yeah.
I think another really important part of that, and Valerie, this is a little bit related to your question, which I thought was a really good one too, is just the evolution of the MCAS and when we sort of look as part of the team meeting at that MCAS accommodations page. We really take that data that we have from previous school years and really look in those team meetings at the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th grade. Bill probably has some familiarity with this too, and really look at what are those accommodations that we know based upon the data that we need. So I think that that drives a lot of what we're looking at. So when we do see those lower scores, we can understand maybe there is some test anxiety. Maybe the student does benefit more from a smaller group. Maybe we need to look at what our rubrics and graphic organizers are and what we can do differently there. So I think seeing that and looking at that, it makes a little bit of sense, because then we really take that data and say, okay, what can we do to support the individual student? What is the student having a challenge with? And in every one of our special education team meetings, we have a section devoted solely to MCAS testing and what those accommodations are and having real conversations about those. So I think that having that data helps us make informed decisions, and that's why you see some of that improvement there. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Another point is that sometimes the accommodations that are being recommended at the team level and proposed on an IEP, if they're not accepted by the family, we're not allowed to implement them. And so sometimes that's also a part that, could just be on timing. Or, hopefully it's not an understanding that we haven't been able to really advocate during the team meeting for the benefit of that accommodation. But sometimes that can hold us up as well.
Yeah. Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, George.
Thank you. So the next two slides that we're going to look at are similar to ones that we looked at last year. And it's really kind of zooming in on the information that we have and how does it also correlate to our own universal screeners that we are using as diagnostic measures on a regular basis. So at the elementary level, we are using iReady for mathematics. This is just a sample of grade 3, although we are seeing the exact same correlation with grade 4 and grade 5. And if you can see all the way to the right, the percentage of MCAS meeting and exceeding is at a 63%, where when we're looking at our iReady data, we are looking at a 62% of mid-grade and above grade percentage of students that are achieving. So it's a really nice indicator, although we say out of one side of our mouth, MCAS is MCAS and it's only a data point. It is nice when the data points do line up with some of our other data measures. And so this is really important when we're really looking at how are we going to drive our instruction. And one thing that Julie Kelly wasn't able to join us this evening, but did point out that our iReady data did talk to us about needing more support in the area of word problems. And so as a result of that initial information that was received at the beginning of the year, she was able to very quickly pivot and on the November 4th PD day offer a session to our 3rd and 4th grade teachers, and it was a problem-solving workshop. So this is an example of how we can immediately look at trends that we might not be making the mark on, and how can we make sure that our instructors are well-versed in that we are sending out a consistent message to students. So not only are we using that diagnostic information to determine who might qualify for interventions, but twofold to say, what is the PD, which is an important element of MTSS. Our next slide, I'm going to ask Erin to unmute herself and to take a look at, because she did a nice chart that many of you might recognize from last year. And this takes a look at our DIBELS data, both at the end of the year data and how it's correlating.
So in years past, I had put in beginning of the year data, but when we're actually thinking of how it looks as compared to MCAS, it made more sense to look at end of year data. So last year's end of data, you can see the percentages are the percentage of students on our DIBELS screeners who are on or above grade levels, scoring at grade level benchmarks or above. And it's the composite score, which means it takes all of the different subtests, and there's a formula that weights things differently depending on time of year and grade level. So you can see the numbers there. I highlighted in purple and blue so you could get an idea of the students who have experienced our UFLY, our Tier 1 Foundational Reading Skills curriculum. So the kindergartners had 1 year of it, and last year's third graders had 1 year as well when they were in second grade, whereas last year's first and second grade students had 2 years. So you can see the percentages look pretty good there, ranging from 85% to 91% of students on or above grade level. And we see the trajectory either staying consistent or moving up from 2023 to 2024. We've spoken before about the students, last year's 4th and 5th grade students did not get the foundational reading skills curriculum, and then there was the COVID element as well. So their scores were a little bit lower at the 74% for their composite on DIBELS. And in years past, we didn't give them all of the subtests, so I didn't have a composite number, so we just looked at the oral reading fluency. But the scores are pretty consistent there. I think the thing to keep in mind with DIBELS as compared to MCAS is DIBELS measures foundational reading skills. Starting in second grade, there's a small element of comprehension, but it's just a 3-minute choose the correct word measure, so it doesn't dive in as deeply as MCAS does, and then there's no writing component here. So as we saw on MCAS, where we tend to struggle more is with the writing piece, which is not measured on DIBELS. So as we're going through that, we're seeing the nice increase for the students with the foundational skills program, and then the students who are currently in 5th and 6th grade, there is an element of fluency that we're still working on. Happy to answer questions too.
Thank you.
Are there any questions about the data itself?
I think we're
You know,
past
and the data is dense, and so it is what we make it as, right? Individual teachers can go in and look at exactly about how their classes have done over time. Schools can do that same kind of a view. We can look at grade level trends and at the whole school level. And this is the part where we need to decide, you know, how it is that we want to use that MCAS data. In terms of our MTSS model that Shana brought up, like, you know, where's the give on the budget? Because certainly there are things that have impacted, whether it's the interventions or class size, or whether it's our ability to provide more robust PD. And so when we look at that MTSS model, we're really looking at all of those elements. You know, do we have staff members who are on board in truly believing that all students can learn? do we have we selected evidence-based practices, whether that's a curriculum product like EL or whether it's UDL as an approach? And do we all believe in that? And then how are we using data consistently throughout the district and at each grade level? Have we made it friendly enough so that it's not just a coach or a coordinator that has to come in, or an administrator to talk to you about the data, but can the teachers really dive into that data on their own? Some of the technical issues that we really need to keep our eye on as we look at budget cuts and wanting to provide level services to everybody is, are we still able to put the time and resources into all of those elements? Are we helping each one of our schools go ahead and schedule with fidelity so that we know that each one of our students is receiving the Tier 1 instruction, and that any student that might qualify for intervention is actually receiving it as a double dose and not replacing Tier 1 instruction? Because where we mostly want our students is in front of that general education licensed teacher. And then we use our interventionists as an additional level or layer. So, and having our screening and diagnostic and progress monitoring, these are all expensive tools that we use. It shows up in our subscriptions, and it's something that we really need to continue to invest in and to make sure that we are providing that for all of our students. That's it. Any other questions?
You mentioned that, there's a lot of data and you could look across schools and across different classes. When you look across schools, what do you see? I would imagine you see comparable performance, but just curious.
Sometimes we see different dips. We try not to compare too much of pin one against the other, but sometimes they ebb and flow a little bit. And it's very helpful, of course, to have the curriculum coordinators connected to each one of those schools so that they can help with that. I think we've seen less of that with the onset of the evidence-based curriculum that we've brought in, and last year and this year, the administrators were actually doing the scheduling themselves. So we were making sure that everybody was having the allotted time for the EL curriculum and for the math. Unfortunately, there's only so much time in the day, and sometimes our science and social studies get squeezed out, which can be a challenge, but we're doing our best so we can. If there are more individual questions that you have, or like you want to see a different type of data for next time, or as a follow-up, we're more than happy to prepare that for you, so just let us know.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Courtney. There was a lot of information in that, so.
Sorry, I was just gonna add, I find MCAS such a challenge because I think we all are subscribed to, our mission and our vision and our strategic district improvement, which doesn't include the word MCAS, right? Doesn't even include the word standardized testing. Right. So I think it's a balance between overemphasizing it or alarmist, right? And trying to just use the data. And I loved the examples of where it's our screeners are lining up, or where we're using it to pivot instruction and professional development. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that I think a lot of headlines last month were focused on districts that have shown recovery. And, so while flat is flat, it's also not recovery and it's not rebounding. So I don't want to dismiss that as just being better than state data, but also trying to balance that with not being an alarmist about it. So I just think it's a bit of a challenge to how we weigh it, but it's also important data for us to keep in mind, like you said, as we talk about the budget and staffing and resources and all of that. So.
And I think you can kind of take this. I know we've done the panorama data as well before, and I think we're looking at a different thing, but it's the same idea. It's another data point in, you know, the bigger picture, so yeah.
Right, like,
Makes
are,
sense.
are we meeting the needs of our students?
Yeah.
And I
Where
think
can we
although
continuously improve?
although we're not looking at trying to get to a specific number,
Sure.
right? Because it's about how are you taking that information? We know that the cohorts change. We see that change that can happen every single year. Looking at it as information to inform what we're doing, I think, is really important.
Right, that's
One of the things that, you know, when we are looking at other places that might be receiving different accolades, I then just want to look and say, okay, well, Westford has historically done very well, and we're still
Right,
continuing to do very well. So
It's that difference between like
yeah,
you can build ground depending on where you were,
Right.
faster
Yeah,
or
yeah,
slower.
right,
Yeah,
right,
I see what
right.
you're saying, yeah.
but it's
Depending
all
on how far you
it's
follow.
important information. We look at, we reflect on it. We just don't want it to
Bless
be.
you, bless you.
We don't want it to be. You're right. We don't want to overemphasize it either. Yeah.
But the other point then as well, and this will silo nicely into our next topic, being the FY27 budget proposal, is we're beginning to kind of, you know, as you said, Courtney, on the MTSS, you know, interventions, class size, robust PD, that we're maybe keeping this in mind as we're having our budget conversations over the coming weeks and months. Because I think it was mentioned in a tri-board meeting before, you know, it's a hard thing to measure impacts on students when we have to do cuts and changes. So this is probably one of the few data points that we can actually use in those conversations.
And recently, Erin Hogan, Julie Kelly, and I participated in a 5-part series on MTSS.
Okay.
And we will be meeting with the consultant individually just to share what our practices are so that she can have an outside lens of where she thinks that we might be able to have improvements. And so we're really looking forward to that. I think it might help us inform a little bit more.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Courtney. Okay, and with that,
We'll shift
Shift.
to the budget
Drum roll.
proposal. I want to remember, I even wrote a note to myself to remember to invite Jenny to come and sit at the table. Not that I want you to feel responsible at all, Jenny, for any part of the presentation, but in the event that someone asks a question, so you don't have to yell across the room, we'll have Jenny join us there.
And just a quick thank you to the curriculum coordinators that
Yes.
joined us.
Thank you very
and
much. That
shared
was,
their,
see, I
their
didn't write
time
that
of their
down.
night.
they don't have to stay.
Thank you.
And yes, you
Yes,
you don't
thank
have to
you.
stay.
Janet, Aaron, and Chris.
Appreciate it, taking your time here tonight. Thanks, guys.
So,
Yep.
we'll transition to the FY27 budget proposal. This is a team effort, so I want to thank everybody who's been working on this. I will say I will take sole responsibility for anything you don't like and anything you're unhappy with. I will take responsibility for that, but anything that, all the hard work that's gone into this, and I think the way in which we are bringing to you a balanced budget, I appreciate the work that our team has put into it, so I want to appreciate all of them. If we go to the presentation that you'll see tonight is following a similar outline that we've been using for the last couple of years, because I think we've had some success with that. I do want to say there's a little bit of a hidden egg in there, or it's not really a hidden egg, it's just right there in front of you, a little preview of a new Westford Public Schools logo with the W that was developed by a student that we'll talk about later when we talk about website stuff. But Courtney was very wise to say, let's put that right on our
Easter egg.
right on our presentation right there. If we go to the next slide, I think that's just kind of talking us through there for purposes for anybody who wants to read this afterwards, and as opposed to just paying attention with us as we go through this. If we go to the slide here, our timeline, again, tonight, this is the proposal that I'm be sharing with you. We are entering into the budget season. You are going to be talking about this over the next few meetings. It'll take you all the way into January, where in January 20th, we have a tentative schedule for you to be voting on the budget. Next week, Town Manager Kristen Loss will be presenting the town's budget to the select board, and our aspect of it will be included in that. December 15th, which will be our next school committee meeting, and January 5th, you'll continue to have your deliberations where you'll be able to ask questions. So tonight, not that you can't ask questions, just don't feel the pressure to ask specific questions, because typically what'll happen is you can start asking us questions over the next couple of weeks, and we'll respond to those questions in the subsequent meetings that we have. January 5th will be our public hearing that we are supposed to have for the public. That's something that we as a school department do that the other departments don't necessarily have to do as well too. So I always want to remind people how well vetted the school budget is before it ever gets to town meeting in the first place. So that's really kind of the purpose of sharing all this. The 29th will be it's already scheduled to have the town finance committee do their hearing of the school budget. And if there's need, on February 5th, there'll be follow-up. And then finally, on March 28th, the voters at town meeting will have the opportunity to vote on the full budget, which includes the school budget within it. One of the things that, if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we decided to do this year was to kind of do a review of the last few years, to bring us to a point to share with everybody where we're at, where we've come from since FY23 specifically. So if you go to that next slide, the purpose of this slide is to, first of all, show what those final budgets have been since FY23, to give you an opportunity to look at, see what the increase has been. And so when it's the overall increase to those budgets, the range that we've seen over the last few years. And then we put in these two other columns, the reduction to the balance, the reduction that we needed to do in order to balance the budget overall, and the increase that we have had with our revolving accounts. This is something I'm going to talk about over and over again throughout this presentation, is looking at these numbers. And if you look at FY23, then you see in FY24, we actually decreased the offsets because we were still utilizing a number of grants at that point. The Student Opportunity Act had a different impact on our budget at that moment in time. We didn't need to utilize the same amount of school choice funds that we had projected that we would need to use. So that's why that number is different in FY24. Then, of course, in FY25, you'll see the reduction to balance the budget was $2.1 million. That was the year that the override did not pass. And we needed to increase our offsets by $413,000. Then, of course, in FY26, the overall reduction was $1.1 million, increased our offsets by $407,000. This year, we're looking at a reduction of $233,000, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and we are suggesting that we increase our offsets by $176,000. If you look at the next slide, it's just a graph to kind of show us, if you're just looking at that, you would think, oh, FY27 is more in line with FY23 and FY24. So FY25 was significant. We know that that was a major stumbling point for us, where we didn't have the override and we had to make significant cuts to the budget, and FY26 followed that. But if you look at FY27, you would think that, oh, we might be leveling out, if you will, to think about what those typical reductions might look like. But I would like you to go to the next slide, because the point I want you to focus on is the increase to our offsets. So our revolving account offset has increased dramatically. So the only reason that those numbers have decreased on the previous slide is because of the increase on these slides here, on this slide here, if that makes sense, right? So in FY25, we had to increase our offsets significantly, and there was even a greater increase in FY26 when we solidified our non-general fund guidebook, the NGFG, which we'll talk about quite a bit tonight. And then as we look at FY27, it is continuing to increase. So this is the beginning of my cautionary tale, which I actually started talking about in FY24. Okay? I want this to be a recurring theme throughout this evening, because while I am bringing to you a proposal that is a balanced budget, I want you all to be concerned about FY28 and to consider and to keep that in your focus as well too. If you go to the next slide, we have a chart here that I did preview this with our chair and vice chair, and there was concern about, well, it looked like the numbers are going up and down, but I said, but it's a bumpy road. That's why I chose this chart, not because of the numbers are actually going up and down, but because it has been a bumpy road. So if you look at FY23 again, that's kind of talking, it's just another way to visualize what I've said in the last couple of slides, that we had a reduction of $225,000 in FY24 and another reduction of $266,000. FY25 is the year of the failed override. It was a $2.1 million reduction. We needed to increase our offsets significantly, and it was the beginning of that development of the non-general fund guidebook. In FY26, you approved the non-general fund guidebook. We continued to increase our offsets, which brings us now, the gray lines are the future here, right? So FY27, what I'm going to be sharing with you is a proposal to increase the offsets by $176,000. We need to balance the difference of $233,000, and the concern being FY28, where I'm going to show this in a later slide, but there's $465,354 in offsets that we do not think will be available in FY28. So we're looking at an initial hole of $465,000 for the FY28 budget before we've even approved the FY27 budget.
And even though we increased offsets in 25 by 413 and then 407, which is 820.
Yep.
And then another 170. So even though over the last 3 years we've increased by 975,000, we only, I say only, and believe that the missing, like we won't have offsets to cover 465 of that. Is that?
Correct. And we have a slide later that's going to break it down to show you
putting
why.
The onlys in quotation.
And I think an important piece is that one of the criticisms that we heard, or one of the concerns maybe, when we were looking at FY25 were that there were people who didn't necessarily understand the amounts that existed in the revolving accounts that we had access to. And so we've made a concerted effort to articulate what those target amounts should be, to actually have very clear delineation as to what those funds are being used for. And we increased their usage because we knew that we knew that it was a struggle for the town to increase the budget overall. What we are looking at is that plan that we developed a number of years ago is coming to an end, and we're going to have a different plan in the future. So if you go to the next slide, this is the work. This is Jenny. You see Jenny's work regularly. She brings wonderful reports to you. She's very, very specific. She's very transparent. When we roll over our budget, it's because she's taken every single employee and she's moved them over to what the contractual increase should be. It's not just a guesstimate, it's an actual, every single line item is rolled over specifically to give us what our projection is. And one of the things that she did was she looked at the NGFG and looked at if we were to look at what the projected revenue would be for any of those non-general the revolving accounts. I was going to say non-general fund guidebook again, but that doesn't make sense. But the actual accounts that exist there, she looked at those projections and looked at if we were to increase those offsets, she projected out how many years could we sustain that. They all had a different amount. When we started this process, we were looking at 3 to 4 years. Now we're looking at 1 to 2 years. Tonight I'm going to tell you we're at target with one of our biggest accounts, with one of those biggest accounts, which is a concern. And so right here, what she's showing is that over the last couple of years, we had increased the preschool offset by $50,000. We'll be at target, and we can't continue to do that. That's what these numbers mean here. That we increase the extracurricular fees by $51,000. That won't be available to us in FY28. The music fee, $51,000. The lost book fee, $3,000. The parking fee, $20,000. The school choice, which is the largest number there, we have increased it by $289,000 over what we anticipate the revenue to be. And we are now at a point where that's not something that we can do. So when we add that all up, that's where we come up with the $465,354,000 concern for FY28. Is everybody following that so far? Yeah. All right. So now let's look at how we developed the FY27 budget. We followed a typical process that we've been doing. We look at what I just said. I mean, Jenny, it's a painstaking process. It takes her a long time to do all of this because she wants everything to be very specific. And she makes sure that all of the line items have been not only analyzed by us as a group, but she rolls them over specifically to look at what the projections are, what the contracts say that they need to be, by employee, by groups, by then the different state codes that we have. We look at that, we compare it to actuals and the historical over time to see, okay, what should we budget for the next year? We always look at our enrollment numbers, which is something that we'll talk about tonight. We met with our leadership team in different groups to talk about what the needs might be, to talk about what the reality is. So sometimes I will say, in recent years, the needs conversation is very short-lived because we start with what the reality is. And so I think everybody starts thinking right away, okay, wait a second, everybody knows that if there's something that they truly believe that they need to come to us with what are they willing to give up to get that thing. So that's been a standard conversation with amongst the leadership team. One of the things that was different this year that I just wanted to talk about, it was something that I mentioned in my December update, which I know you all read when you got it this afternoon. But this year, the Healy administration has been having these local contribution study hearings that have been taking place. And I participated in one of them a few weeks ago. It's in conjunction between DESE and with the Department of Revenue's Division of Local Services. And what honestly astounded me, I wasn't really aware how widespread the budget concerns have been. Every single district that spoke talked about similar cuts to their district that we had made too. The difference being is that we did ours 2 years ago, and they're looking at those issues now. So we're kind of ahead of that process, but because of the massive budget challenges that have existed throughout the state, they're looking at the Chapter 70 model, and they're looking at, do we really need to change this formula? And so I am optimistic that because it's impacting so many communities across the state, that at the state level, we might actually see some change, which could benefit us when we're looking at these future years. So that is a different aspect to this year, whereas the last couple of years, it's been all about our locality, and it's about the struggle that we've been seeing in Westford specifically. Now that we're seeing many, many more communities across the state, all different sizes, from urban to suburban to rural to middle size, everybody was sharing very similar issues, which I think is could be helpful to us in the future. So I wanted to just put that in there. I continue to be appreciative of the finance subcommittee, the fact that we organized that as a school committee, and for the different members who have cycled through every single year, because that has been a very valuable opportunity for us. We've talked about the fee increases that we're going to mention tonight. We've looked at the NGFG in general. It's just been a wonderful sounding board. And I would also encourage all of you, if you have specific questions, to reach out to your colleagues that are on the finance subcommittee, because they have a different lens, or maybe have had a couple of more opportunities to dive into the data around some of these decisions or some of these proposals. And then finally, the last thing is that, as we always do, Jenny and I met with the town manager and the finance director earlier in the season, and we had shared with them at the time what our rollover projection was, which is what Jenny had really looked at when we look at rolling over the current staff and looking at what our needs are with the increases in utilities and increases in transportation. And the budget that we had was $71,724,874, which is a 3.37% increase over our FY26 budget. And so we had presented that to them. So if we now move into our budget overview, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the FY26 budget was $69,388,572. I just shared with you what our rollover request was. And again, that's looking at current staffing. It's looking at the increase, the projected increase in utilities, the projected increase in transportation, a couple of different changes there. When we met with them, they initially shared with us that they thought that they would only be able to give us a 2.9% increase. Then when I reached back out to Kristen and Dan and shared with them what that impact would be, and then I said that I believe that I can bring to them a balanced budget of 3.03 increase, and they said that they can support that. So tonight, what you see before you will be a budget that would support this 3.3% increase, which is $71,491,045. The difference there is the $233,829 from that initial request. So is everybody following that thought process and methodology so far? Okay. So if we break that down, we included what our strategy was. We started that last year. I thought that was helpful. We looked at the reductions, efficiencies, and potential increase in offsets in order to eliminate this deficit and to bring a balanced budget to town meeting. So that first number there is what I just shared with you. What we're going to be able to talk about is we identified the increase of $176,462 in the non-general fund guide offsets, which we can talk about. We identified potential efficiencies in the subscriptions of $19,694. And then to make up that difference, we would reduce our comp reserve by $37,673. So those three things allow us to meet this budget without any staff cuts, without cuts to personnel in the way we've seen in the previous years. I'm going to talk about the enrollment in a couple of slides. I'm going to talk about what this budget includes in terms of shifting some positions, but it's not an overall reduction of FTEs or full-time equivalents, if that makes sense to everybody. Okay. So if you go to the next slide, the increase in the NGFG, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but what that means is the potential impact here is we're approaching many account balance targets, and we need new funding sources for FY28. So yes, we're increasing those offsets, but that is not a long-term. We have now done that for a couple of years, and we've reached the end of that sustainability. Okay, so that's something that will help us for FY '27, but it is not something that we can continue to do for the future. The subscription efficiencies, it is going to require some of our staff to utilize alternative technologies, right? We have some subscriptions that cost more that might be used in some grade levels where a less expensive version is also available to us, which might not be the preferred tool, but it would still allow us to provide the same level of support and access to our students. So it's not ideal, and it's not the preferred in some cases, but by looking at different versions of that, we've been able to realize some, if there were redundancies sometimes, and we've been kind of doing that over the last couple of years, saying, okay, wait a second, this school found a grassroots, effort found this one thing that now might be a better thing if we just tell everybody you need to use the same thing. So that's kind of that one's a little bit more difficult to kind of talk about because of the impact. But overall, it might mean people needing to learn how to use some new tools. And then overall, the reduction in comp reserve, the $37,000 there, that decreases our ability to absorb some unforeseen staffing changes. So for example, if we needed an emergency ESP, that might become a little bit more problematic to us, right? If there's an increase in separations or people retiring in a different way, we might need to become creative in how we solve that. But that's the impact overall that would have there. At any time, I invite my team, any of the three of you in the room, to interrupt me if I say anything that's different or I'm missing any information. Just want to remind you. But at the same time, you do not need to shoulder any of the talking. So if we look at the enrollment, every year I bring to you a similar slide as this, which will show the potential changes based on if we roll over our students from this year to next year, we look at what those sections will be. And so if you look at the far corner, the far right, it'll see the FTE changes. And so the only real change that we're looking at is that I'll look at the negative number first, because for me that's an easier way to start. We look to see where those changes are. And if you look at grade 5 at the Abbott School, you'll see that this year we have 7 sections of grade 5, but next year we'll only need 5 sections based on the population. So in theory, those 2 sections, as those students are moving on to middle school, we would no longer need those 2 sections at the elementary level. So in some years past, we've said that could be a reduction that we might be able to absorb in our budget. This year, when we look at changes that we need, one of the things that we've identified is those higher sections at Robinson, specifically because of the concern with the grades in K to 2, in order to not repeat a similar issue that we've had this year, I would propose that we increase the sections in grade 1 so that you'll see the impact that it'll have on the average class sizes, which is in that second to far right column. I'm seeing nodding heads from all of you, so I feel like you're following that line of thinking. With this, in case you haven't noticed it already, I do just want to address and highlight that this does not address the 26 class size in Crisafulli in grade 4 for next year. Okay, so that's something that we just need to keep an eye on. But it is proactively helping us decrease the grade 1 class sizes at Robinson. This year, grade 1 is high, but they'll be moving into more sections in grade 2 at Robinson. So that's why those numbers will be able to balance out, and the class sizes will not be as high next year as they are this year in the K to 2 schools.
And Stony Brook, is there enough outgoing 8th graders To balance
So that's the next
influx at
slide.
Abbott? Okay.
Thank you for asking that question. That is the next slide. No, good for you. That's the elementary, so I appreciate you're just helping move us
A
along.
really good segue.
Yeah, excellent. So if we go to the next slide.
One quick.
Oh, sorry, well, let's go back to
Wait,
that
I
slide.
segued
No.
already.
No, I just.
Valerie wasn't ready to move.
Okay. I touched something, now I'm back.
Okay.
All
Are we
good. Yep.
All right, so can we go to the next slide? So the next slide, what you'll see is, based on the middle school model, Shayna, the middle school model that exists with having
So
you
many
know,
sections.
so many sections already, we're able to absorb it differently, right? So you'll see that as those students go to sixth grade, we don't see an increase in class sizes. So it is something that we're able to absorb. The other thing I would like you to pay close attention to is that right now, although we don't break out the class sizes at the high school because it's just too complicated with all the different sections, the different courses, when you do look at those middle school sections, you'll see that they are below what we consider those expectations to be. And we're happy to see lower class sizes, so that's not a concern, but it's going to play into something I'm going to talk about later in the presentation for us to think about for the future. Okay, so right now the expectations are we would like to see class sizes below 25 or below for grades 6 through 12, and our middle school sections for the most part are below that. So if you go to the next slide, so here is what I was talking about when I said instead of absorbing those reductions as a cost savings in our budget, this year I already mentioned that first line, which is moving one of those sections to the Robinson School to decrease class sizes in first grade, and that the funding source would be the reduction of the one of those 1.0 FTEs in the current Abbott grade 5. And then the next thing is something that I've mentioned in a couple of other meetings just as a preview of FY27 is we propose to use the other section, decreased section of FTEs at grade 5 in Abbott to fund the an additional school psychologist to help support testing and consultation demands that we are seeing increase throughout the district. Everybody following that so far?
Yeah.
So that does mean in this scenario here, that does mean that, you know, potentially, because again, I always want to make sure that people understand that we're talking about real people here, right? So it does mean that one position, an individual could move from one school to another school and still be a classroom teacher, but to take one of these classroom teacher positions and translate it into a school psychologist position does mean that there's a potential that a classroom teacher could lose a position.
And I think also it's a net neutral or close to net neutral funding source, but you're also changing a teacher from a fifth grade to a first grade, which
That
means
is also, yep.
you're going to have to make some significant swaps because it's not as simple as taking fifth grade to fifth grade in another school where that teacher could move.
Thank you.
So there is definitely going to be a staff impact where somebody's going to have to take over first grade that's going to have to adjust
Yeah.
a fifth grade teacher is, gets
Like
bumped,
a
a whole
ripple.
bump and,
Yes.
The ripple
you know.
effect.
The unfortunate
And morale.
piece is that the nature of being in the elementary schools is that the staff sees the number of sections that come through their building. And so they often understand that as a grade moves through, it's going to impact the sections. And so there's a certain understanding that there might be some shifting that could happen within their building every single year. But to your point, we're looking at the potential of, again, changing to a different building, to a different grade level that's not just within the same building. We do tend to have different number of retirements each year, or people who make different choices. So I'm hopeful that this might not need to end up in somebody losing their position, but it is a potential.
At the very
reality.
least, it could be a bunch of rejiggering.
Right,
where
moving around.
Enough
Yep.
of people move around that no one is losing a job, but there might be several people have to switch grade levels or schools.
Right.
So I think we just don't want to lose that, because that is an impact as well.
So if we move to the next 2 slides, thank you. This will be, again, this is the same slide that we used last year for the non-general fund guidebook, except it has the new link to the new non-general fund guidebook. But I put this here, again, for people who might be reading this slide presentation so that they can understand why do we have this, the work that went into this, the different accounts that exist. I don't feel the need to read this to you specifically. The one piece I want to just highlight is that last paragraph, is for anybody who might just be listening, is to remember that that revolving accounts and special revenue funds are audited annually by an external CPA firm following the fiscal year schedule. And the food service accounts are also subject to single audit because they're above the $1 million threshold. So that's just, so for people who might be listening in for the first time, understand that all of these accounts are audited on a regular basis. And we now have, I think, a very clear way to share all of the different information. And I have an example of it later in this presentation just for people who might be seeing it for the first time. But so as we move into the non-general fund guidebook. So again, our focus this year is to enhance the utilization of the revolving accounts and special revenue funds. We want to continue to utilize the NGFG to support the FY27 budget process and to strategically leverage revolving accounts and special revenue funds to offset the general fund's operating budget. Our goal remains maintaining a sustainable financial plan. Now this is only on a 1 to 2 year basis. Previously, we said it was 3 to 4 years. Now we're looking at 1 to 2 years, and it's really should be 0 to 2 years, okay? But like I mentioned to you, the total offset increase, it's not the overall offset, it's just the increase is another $176,462.40. Thank you, Jenny. For the 40 cents, okay.
I was thinking, should I remove those decimal points?
Right. No, thank you for, you're so specific. And again, right there in the middle, it's bolded, but people might not read all of this, but a broken record if you're just tuning in at this moment in time. New identified funding will be needed to support the general fund for FY28, as those increased offset amounts will no longer be available. If you're just now joining us, go back like maybe 10, 15 minutes and you'll see the slide earlier where we break that down. So based on the review of the NGFG, this is the work that the subcommittee has looked at. We've talked about this already in previous meetings. These are the changes that we are suggesting specifically to it. So you'll see, you'll see the changes here, right? So we are suggesting that we increase the school building usage by another $50,000. So that's $100,000 plus the $50,000 there. Integrated preschool, it was already at $350,000. We are suggesting that we increase it by another $67,700. This is also connected to a tuition increase, which I'm going to talk about on another slide. The early arrival program, we are suggesting that we increase that offset by another $5,000. So it was already $15,000. Increasing it by another $5,000. We're also, this is connected to being able to increase the hourly rate from $7.25 to $20 an hour, which we think is an important increase for these staff members. The elementary book sale, we're already using $1,500 of an offset. We are recommending that we increase that another $1,500 to a total of $3,000. One of the big changes, we talked about doing a little bit more research on the guidance college revenue account. Our recommendation is that we discontinue for FY27 collecting the $8 per student fee for transcript requests. There is still funds in that account that we think we can spend down over the next few years. So we think that we should no longer be including that expectation.
And just to clarify, that account can only be used to cover the transcript requests. You can't move
Use
that
it for something else.
anything else.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. The lost book account was at $5,000, where we are suggesting that we increase that by another $3,000. Athletics, $143,500. We are suggesting that we increase that by another $25,000. This is also connected to a fee increase, which I will talk about on a later slide. And then food services, it was an offset of $187,232.40. This is the 40 cents here. That 40 cents is in both of those. Doesn't that equal 80? No, because it's still just the increase of an additional 40 cents.
Oh.
Sorry, didn't mean to sidebar there. I just immediately saw the cents. And so we are suggesting that we increase it by another $24,262.40. That's connected to some additional allowable costs that we've identified specifically, which we can talk about if people have questions for that. And then the proposed circuit breaker we're going to talk about in another slide too. So I just put that there so that you would see if you had a question about that. We'll know we're going to talk about that. Any questions so far? Even though I kept saying we're going to talk about that later. Okay, good. So let's look at that next slide. So when we did a review of the fees that we have, when we looked at the comps from other communities, the range for our integrated preschool tuition, the comps from other communities range from $4,000 to $10,915. Our current fee in FY26 is $6,350. It has been that same fee for a long time.
Yeah, almost 9 years.
Almost 9 years. We're recommending that we increase it to $7,000, which is still in the middle of those comps. And then we think that now that we have the NGFG, this is something, I'll say this for Tom's benefit because he's not here, because he mentioned it multiple times in the subcommittee meetings, a concern about making sure that people don't think that, oh, well, we haven't adjusted it for so long, so we're just going to increase it by, this huge percentage. The whole purpose of having the NGFG, which we now have, is that we have a regular review of all these fees. So we won't see a long period of time go by where someone hasn't set eyes on these fees to say, should we be increasing it incrementally? So I just want people to be aware of that. Additionally, when we looked at comps from other communities, based on the recommendations that we've received, we think that we should be increasing our athletic fees as it's indicated on this slide. So our current fees for FY26 are $275 for middle school and $325 for high school. We are recommending a $50 increase for both of them, which would, nope, I lied, $25 increase. They are $50 apart. Yep. So a $25 increase for both of them. So FY27, the middle school fee would be $300 per sport, and the high school fee would be $350 per sport. Yes.
Two small tidbits I would ask here before it goes like on our business budget page, where I think more eyes might look for it there in our community, is just to add that, like, just how you have the comps under the for the preschool tuition.
Include that?
Well, no, I was going to say one of the finance subcommittee conversations was really about that this felt tied to a 7% increase in transportation costs.
Thank you.
And I would also, just for somebody who doesn't have a middle schooler or a high schooler, to clarify that these are per sport fees.
Yeah, and not just a flat yearly fee.
Right.
Yep.
That's all, just two little tidbits.
Okay, thank you. Yes, excellent.
Make
Yeah,
it-
we did talk about the fact that it was the connection to the increase of transportation costs.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that I wanted to really highlight for you was our school choice balance. So if you looked at in FY23, our end of year balance was $1.7 million. That the number's even getting smaller here. So no, yeah, $1.7 million. We have made a concerted effort to try to use the school choice funds in a responsible way over the last few years, and you'll see that it's spent down. Within the non-general fund guidebook, the target that we have worked on and talked about and you've approved was that the target end of year balance would be 1% of our general fund. So if you look at the FY26 projected end of year balance, it would be $741,000, which would be just barely above our 1%. So that means at the end of this fiscal year, we've actually reached our target balance for where we think school choice should remain, so that we have it for the curriculum purchases that we need. When we bought the new EL curriculum, we used school choice money for that. When we have emergencies that come up, we were able to use school choice funds for that. You heard a few meetings ago, both Dr. Jeffcoat and Dr. Kelly talk about our science curriculum. We need school choice funds to pay for a new curriculum. So our projected FY27 balance would be $471,000 with these increases. So I'm sharing that with you because the next thing I want you to think about would be on the next slide. This year we have 85 school choice students in our district. The base reimbursement for students is $5,000 from the sending district. This is not tied to the budget, but I want this to be a part of a beginning conversation for you so that when I bring the proposed school choice openings to you later in the spring, you'll have an understanding as to why we're talking about this. So it's not anything that you need to, it isn't tied to the budget, if that makes sense. But I think it's something that we should be looking at because we are increasing our usage of school choice funds and then potentially going below the target. So I'm going to talk about potentially increasing those numbers. But if you go to the next slide.
Sorry, so is the 471 with the 90 kids or 85 kids?
85.
Okay,
85.
thank you.
Thank you, that's a good point. And so the other challenge there is that we project approximately $500,000 worth of school choice revenues, which we'll talk about later because that'll be on the revenue slide. That changes every year because I say that the $5,000 is the base amount. The state does consider whether or not students who are coming as a part of the school choice program are receiving any special education services. And so they look at that. And so there might be some increased amounts there if, for example, a student who is coming to us from another community is receiving significant special education services. The state acknowledges that that's costing us more than $5,000 per student. So that's why when we do quick math, we could just do 85 times 5,000 to figure out what it might be. But the reality is that we see around $500,000 worth of revenue. That's why that doesn't completely line up, because if you multiply 85 or 90 by 5,000, you won't get 500. Okay, so if you go to this slide, I just wanted to show you the historical enrollment that we've seen with school choice. So in FY22, we had approved, the top line is the approved number of slots that you approve in the spring, because I always bring that to you and you vote on that. And then the end of year Sims school count. The reason why that differs every single year is because every year we have students who will be part of the school choice program, and sometimes they move into the district during the year, in which case at the end of the year they don't count as school choice anymore, or their ability to be part of the school choice program requires them to provide transportation. That might have become something that they couldn't do, or they might have moved on their own. And so that's why those numbers change a little bit. And so it hasn't always been the same. And if you look at FY26, as of October 1st, we have 85 you approved 85, we still have 85. But I just wanted to show you this range as it was changing every single year. We have increased those numbers. The way in which we've increased that, this is a little bit more for Jessica and Shayna's benefit because you haven't been a part of the conversations every single year. But if you'll remember, over the last couple of years, we've looked at ways in which we could strategically increase our school choice numbers, because we also have a decent number of students within our district who are here because their parents are staff members, and the contract allows them to bring their students into the district if it doesn't require us to increase staffing. So when a staff member makes that request, if they live in a different community, historically, we didn't always automatically put those students in the school choice lottery. And we started looking at that a little bit more strategically and realized, well, wait a second, we can do that. So we started putting staff members, students in the lottery. And if we go through the lottery, it's an open process. We're picking names out of a bowl. It has to be public. We follow the law every single year. If we pull a staff member's child's name, that's allowing us to move them from one column to another. It didn't increase our overall population because they were already a student enrolled in Westford Public Schools. Another thing that we realized in the time that I've been superintendent was that Mass General laws allow siblings of students in the school choice program to have priority in the lottery. So we were able to look at our list and realize that we had, again, some staff members' kids who were already selected into the lottery, but their siblings weren't because they were already enrolled in school. And we could open slots in certain grades knowing that students who were already enrolled could potentially be the priority for those spots, and it could help us to maximize our school choice opportunities. So that's a reason why we've seen some of these numbers increase over time, is that we've been able to say, wait a second, these are already students who are in our district. We just weren't necessarily receiving the appropriate funding for them. But if the lottery is open and if everything matches and follows all the general laws, there's ways in which we can say we could look to see, is it possible that we could recode some students so that we're actually receiving the benefit of the school choice program. Does that make sense to everybody?
A small note here for me is that I think in years past it could have felt like, from an outsider's point of view, that the school choice slots were just increasing because we're money hungry and we just want more revenue.
Right.
But with the NGFG, we have brought that fund and that account into the light, and we're having these regular reviews of how is that being used and what is the target, and it's a strategy instead of just sort of a blank lever, like a blank check lever that we're using in the budget conversation. So I think that's very important as we look at over time. This is increased, yes, but strategically, thoughtfully, not just, oh, shoot,
You're not
let's
picking a
increase
number
this.
from the sky.
Yeah.
And to that end, I've had conversations with other superintendents in different districts where some have had to always use school choice money to balance their budget. Some have not used that. And we're in this interesting situation where we've been relying on it to a certain degree. If it goes away or it decreases, it would have a serious negative impact on us. And so, to Valerie's point, I mention this at this point because I think we need to be strategic about maintaining what that revenue is as part of our overall fiscal health.
And you mentioned it earlier, but just to reiterate too, is we do have certain grade levels where there is declining enrollment.
That's right.
And this is a fiscally responsible way to target revenue in a way that is not negatively impacting our classrooms at certain grade levels. And I would hope that that is perceived as us, as a group being fiscally responsible and looking at ways that we can help keep
Right.
the budget where it needs to be without, asking for more from the town, so.
We don't want to create a situation where we're burdening our staff or increasing the class sizes, but we have a wait list every single year of people who want to come to Westford Public Schools. And so where we had a decline in enrollment, or when you have that fluctuation, but yet you say, oh, wait a second, this grade level, there's actually a couple of openings where we could invite people in and then it could remain consistent with the other grade levels. That is something to consider. And that's one of the things I think we could look at, especially as we look at as we look at the spring when I'll bring more specific information to you then. But I thought that it was a helpful conversation because we're talking about the non-general fund guidebook, we're talking about these accounts at this time. They are related. It's not dependent on that, and it's not a decision when you make a final decision on the budget this year, the number of school choice slots will not be included in that. That'll be a separate conversation that we have in the spring. If we go to the next slide, I wanted, for the purposes, in case people aren't diving deep into the non-general fund guidebook, I did want to have a slide here that showed an example of all of those different funds, just one example. And I decided I thought it would be helpful for us to highlight the Special Education Reserve Fund, because I want people to remember that last year we removed $400,000 from the reserve fund in order to close out FY25 because of the increased special education costs that we saw. So we started, if you look at the bottom of this page, you'll see that this is the way that all of the accounts are organized in the fund book. In the fund
It's a fun
guidebook.
book for
It
some
is a
of
fun.
us.
It's a fun book. It's a fun book. But you'll see that, we were strategically increasing that with funds at the end of the year in FY23 and FY24. We had money available to us when we were closing out the year, $200,000. We increased that because the target, the appropriate end of year balance, which is in purple on that screen, but it's blue,
it is blue on
when
the
I look
thing,
at it,
yeah.
but that's interesting. Everyone sees that as purple, right? That's not just
Yes.
me? Okay, thank you. Our appropriate end of year balance, we believe, should be $1 million. We've never seen that.
No.
We have yet to see that. And if you look, the FY25 balance was $342,000. Our projected balance at the end of FY26 is $343,000. At this moment in time, we are not projecting that we would have funds that we could deposit into that account.
And just to highlight a little bit about why that could be a problem,
Mhm.
right, is my very plethora understanding of all these finances, but correct me if I'm wrong, right, is that this money is reserve money in case our expenses are higher than we anticipated, so that we can balance a budget at the end of the year, which is what we did in FY25. But if your starting balance is at $343,000, that does not give you a lot of wiggle room to absorb a significant amount of increased costs going into the next fiscal year. So I just want to
Yeah.
call that out as
And Shayna-
for someone's
That's
looking at it, you want to have this cushion of $1 million because the special education can fluctuate so much.
It can.
You
It
can have
change.
kids going in and out of the district. You can have kids whose services change over time. Somebody has a medical problem they didn't have at the beginning of the year that happens in the middle of the year. That can make a huge fluctuation in our special education costs. And if we don't have a cushion to absorb that, we can end up having a deficit at the end of the year that we then have to find a way to cover.
And,
So I just
and
wanted
by
to-
having that reserve account, it actually allows you then to try to be more specific in your budgeting for everything, because we know that special education costs can be so different that it's a challenge to budget for what the unknown might be. But if you have a reserve account, then your overall general fund budget for the next year, you might have more confidence in being able to establish specific numbers for that. But without it, you are always concerned, do you have enough to cover any costs?
We have such a good finance subcommittee leader.
Right?
That I understand all the things in the
Right?
NGFG.
Okay. So the total offset increase, if you look here, the FY27, the increases overall, and we're going to break this down again in future slides here, but again, $176,462. We put the totals in there because I just wanted to remind people what those overall offsets are. We're talking about this year, the FY26, their offsets $2,549,124,000. Next, for FY27, we're still looking at offsetting the budget by $2,725,586. Okay? Then, if we combine that with the recent increases to the circuit breaker, for FY27 budget, almost $1 million, $902,000 of it is being absorbed by increases to offsets. Correct? Is everybody following that? Okay, good. All right, so now we'll kind of break down circuit breaker and we'll talk about our main revenue and expense categories. So circuit breaker. Circuit breaker, a reminder for folks, it represents the partial reimbursement that comes to us from the state based on the previous year's allowable special ed expenditures. Okay? So we submit that to the state, they look at that, and then they say, okay, this is what we will reimburse you for your special education costs. So we take the previous year and then we apply it to a subsequent year. So the FY27 budgeted amount of $4,024,734,000 reflects the FY26 circuit breaker reimbursement, which had an increase, which we learned about. At one point we thought the increase was going to be higher. They did do an audit, and then they said, no, we're not going to give you that much. So they're giving us a little bit less, but it's still an increase of $588,000. And in FY25, we had an increase adjustment of $137,000. So that's what's coming together to make up that amount that I had showed on the previous screen, which is the $725,000. So that's just the increase. So again, look at that number. FY27, the circuit breaker amount that we are counting on and that we are planning to apply is $4 million, $4,024,734,000. That's $734. Whew, that's a lot. And we use that for different tuition costs. So again, with grants, we get grant 240. Every year we get $120,000. $820,000 for that, and we're continuing to project that for FY27. That these are the different buckets that we get. The miscellaneous revenues. So these are monies that we've received. When you look at that, for athletics, activities, and music fees, over $1 million comes in from fees. School choice, we're projecting $500,000. That's what I talked about earlier. Bus and parking fees, we're projecting that'll be $752,000. And for our pre-K and early arrival fees, $419,000. Those are all the fees that we are projecting that we will rely upon as a public school system to help support our budget. Now, I say that because I firmly believe in the public school system, and we do have fees, but I have always made it publicly known that I don't think we should have to have fees. But we do, and that's what we have, So that's what we're dealing with. But as a public school system, I just want people to remember that we are now looking at, okay, quick math, so that's $1 million, that's gonna be another $2 million. That's almost $3 million worth of fees and school choice. Well, you take the school choice out, so we'll take that out. So we'll say,
2.5.
2.5, thank you.
And just for a point of note, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, these fees, while they're going in as, counted here as revenue, quote unquote, right? They are funding these programs.
Yes.
So even though we're calling the pre-K early arrival fees at $419,000 and we're calling it a revenue, it is paying for the usage of the buildings, the electricity, the staff that are participating in those classes, all the support staffs. Same thing for athletics. That money is covering bus fees, any, all the costs of running those athletic programs.
I will say that one's it doesn't cover the costs. Yeah. It supplements some of the costs, but it doesn't cover the costs of.
No. And the bus parking fees, right? We're still paying out of pocket costs for bus fees above and beyond the $752K that we're. So I feel like sometimes when people hear the word revenue, you're thinking that these are generating money, extra, but what they're doing is offsetting the cost to the district. And to Dr. Chu's point, he'd prefer we didn't have to offset costs to the district, but alas, that's where we are. So I just wanted to make that point of note too, because I don't want people to mistake that as income revenue versus.
It's not profit.
It's not
profit, yeah. Nobody is profiting when you paid for your bus fee.
It's
No
like
one's
cost
profiting.
sharing. Yeah, we are cost sharing with the families of the cost to run these programs or to offer this service.
So if we move into the expense categories, this is no surprise. 81% of our budget is salaries. Okay, so $57,939,834 is what the salaries cost for our FY27 budget, and that's approximately 81%. You'll see the breakdown there for each category. Building and grounds, it's 2.5 million. The admin, different individual contracts that we have, $5.9 million. Secretarial staff, almost $1 million. The support staff, which is our teaching assistants, our interventionists and coaches, that's $5.1 million. And then our teaching staff of teachers, the nurses, the counselors, library media specialists, so that's Unit A, and I could have just said the different units, I guess, too. That's $43.3 million, all coming to $57.9 million of our budget.
Just a small point here, which could be made on this slide or on the pie chart slide, but there were plenty of tri-board meetings focused on efficiencies after the override failure, and I think these data points are why it is so difficult to have those conversations with a public school system, because you just can't find enough efficiencies to when 81% of your budget is people.
Yeah, and when I say that, I also want to say that I am grateful for these people, right? Like, that's another piece. I feel like we are investing in people, right? And so that's a good thing. This is actually the backbone or the foundation of our school district. So I don't want that to sound like that's a complaint that it's 81% of our, but it's to Valerie's point, there's not a lot of other places that we can be looking, and we still look in those, the 29% of other places, but you'll see what those things are. So when we look at operations and facilities, it's on that we've said this every year. Unfortunately, this isn't something that I'm proud of, but again, this budget level does not support preventative maintenance. So Jeff Goodwin brought to you a bunch of capital items. He brought that to capital, and we're looking at across the district and across the town major facility concerns because preventative maintenance has not been included in our budgets for so long. So you're seeing an increase from FY26 to FY27 of about just over $400,000. That's primarily the projected utility costs increase. Is that correct, Jenny?
The utility costs and also employee salary increase.
Yeah.
Custodian employee and the maintenance employees.
Thank you. So our next slide, talking about our special education out-of-district tuitions. So we are projecting a similar number of students for FY27. This year, we currently have 64 students. We're looking at 65 students for FY27. One of the things the reason is because we actually think that we'll have 65 before the end of FY26 as well too. But you'll look at the number breakdown are very similar. If you look over to the costs, you'll see that the increase, interestingly, the general fund, there's a decrease in FY27, okay? Because of the increase in support and the increase in circuit breaker that we're seeing. There'll be actually a decrease in general fund, but it's an overall increase in special education costs.
And we don't know if we can rely on circuit breaker like that 2 or 3 years down the road.
You can't, right? You don't know that. You don't know. I mean, that's one of the things I talked about earlier about the hearings. They're talking about Chapter 70 and local contributions, but they're also talking about circuit breaker and whether it's fully funded or whether it's not. The other issue is that, like we saw this year, we saw an increase in our circuit breaker based on the previous year's expenses. But then, if our special education costs don't necessarily increase, then it means that a potential increase that we're hoping to see in circuit breaker won't realize either.
You realize too.
And we won't have, as we just talked about, with the reduction of our reserve fund for special education, we don't have a generous buffer if we are
Jenga
awarded a
pieces.
circuit breaker amount that is lower than expected.
Right. So then, if we look at transportation, another significant concern that we've just seen is just an increase in costs. We talked about it being an impact on the athletic fees because we've seen an increase in the different runs. We also just have our contractual increase that we have. We are in a contract with D-Bus, and so we know that for FY27, we're going to see that increase from 4.6 million to about $5.2 million. And there is the pie chart that Jenny created for us. That it's always helpful to have a pie chart, so people can kind of see that. It's looking a little bit like Pac-Man, but you can just see that breakdown. And then the last slide is again just that overview. The difference here is that I did put a link to the FY27 budget memo, except up there it doesn't look like it says, and you'll see this is a summary of everything that we just said, and it actually has a link to the full budget workbook, but it also has just the breakdown of increases by all the different state codes that we organize our budget with. And so as you all become very familiar with this over the next month, we share that with you so that you have access to all of that. Is there anything that I neglected to say that Jenny or Courtney or Gerard think of?
We also upload the NGFGs into the school committee packet.
Yeah.
You can find it over there.
And that link is also in this presentation too. So if someone's just looking at on that MGFG slide that I kind of skipped over quickly, that link takes you to the current NGFG.
Yeah, sorry, flashing by. I'm trying to go all the way back to there we go.
Oh, the timeline, thank you.
Yep. So, just talking about next steps, because I know tonight is normally your presentation, where you just kind of give us a quick snapshot.
Sure.
That took you 5 minutes.
So now you have this information. You might have comments, questions, one of the things that has been helpful to us is that we've created like a Google Doc
Yep.
where if you funnel your questions maybe through the chair and we then get a copy of that Google Doc, we can be prepared to answer any questions that you might have on December 15th or even then in subsequent meetings as well too. It's a similar process that we do with the Finance Committee as well too. It's helpful for us if we get those questions in advance so that we can just provide you with as much information as possible. But we're also always just open for questions in general. But so on December 15th, we will have as a budget item, as a agenda item, we will be deliberating about the budget. And like I said earlier, on January 5th, we'll have our official public hearing. So the way that works is that you will vote to go into public hearing, which then allows the general public really an extended time beyond what our typical public comment is for them to share their thoughts, comments about the budget.
And they can ask us questions
They can
too,
ask
like
questions, yeah,
we can
sure.
have a conversation, so it's different.
And
in
then
that sense.
you vote to end that public
Yeah.
hearing, and then go back to your regularly scheduled meeting protocol. And then on January 20th, that's when we've scheduled that you would have your vote on the budget, hopefully to approve a budget so that you've given it your stamp of support in some way before it goes to the Finance Committee. And then they will also ask us questions that evening, on the 29th. And like I said, if they need follow-up, that's available on February 5th. And then eventually our budget goes to the town meeting. You look at the line items for our budget in different ways. When it goes to town meeting, it's just the school budget, as that overall number. That's what the town will be voting on.
Okay.
I also just wanted to add from the Finance Subcommittee, in past years, we've kind of either taken guidance from the full committee of like where to have some more in-depth conversations. So once those questions come in, maybe we can look at that and see if there's anything there that makes sense. And we have put together like a placeholder meeting in early mid-January that to kind of just hold space for that, depending on how it shakes out to support this process.
So in terms of populating any questions or clarifying comments, I'll send out a link to everybody so you all have access to that. And the idea being it as well is before you start, maybe throwing in some of your questions, have a look as well at if somebody else's, so we'll be able to see everybody's questions, so we're not repeating ourselves 5 times over, but we can all see the same information that we're getting back. Sometimes if it's a simple question, Jenny or Dr. Chu might just give us a quick answer in the spreadsheet, and then other times we'll do more discussion on it.
We have a whole date for January 12th. Was that if we needed an additional budget meeting, which?
One of the things we didn't know is that because this is the Monday after the Thanksgiving break, when we first set the calendar up, we didn't know if it would
have
be
everything
realistic
prepared.
for us to have a budget presentation for you tonight. And if not,
You guys
then
are
that
so
would have
great.
kicked us.
You got it all together, and it looks
We did.
fantastic.
Yes.
You worked so hard, so thank you.
So, I don't necessarily think that those holds are necessary, but
Yeah.
who knows what the questions might come up in.
Well, it's just,
Yeah,
we're talking about timelines, so.
Yep.
thank you.
Okay. So, are you something else?
Well, I was just gonna add that, to me, it feels like we're at like this dual reality, right? Like we're grateful for an increase in the town allocation, but it's not like that is restoring things that have been cut. And the addition of a school psychologist is not some discretionary ask. It is because we see very real needs and constraints in that area that necessitate that staffing addition.
So, ideally, we could have had it this year. The fact you've waited an extra year.
I guess I just want to like underscore, and I think, I know you said this a couple times, you feel like a broken record. I feel like a broken record because since the override request, I think one of the pieces of information that I want to keep communicating to the community is that this is just a structural deficit. That when the expenses are increasing faster than your revenue sources are, which is our town allocation and our these other funding sources, that's just a structural deficit. So we're in this place where we're using these sources strategically, and the only word I can think of is kind of like it's stable but fragile. And I am a little concerned that that this budget cycle might have low engagement because there isn't. I'm grateful there's not drastic cuts, but I wonder what the engagement level will be, and I think that this is part of a story for the future. And so I would encourage anyone listening to really still try to stay involved and stay engaged because it is fragile.
Well, you see it, I mean, we're looking at potentially increasing fees for athletic fees and stuff. The town voted on pay-as-you-throw, like, we're having to fill in the gaps however we can. So I think people are seeing that. But we just have to keep mentioning it. And I think the presentation started off really well tonight. You really clarified kind of what FY28 is looking like already. So I think that's helpful. I'm going to move us on because I know we have one quick other item on the agenda. So we will be back on this. We'll have more time to get really in depth as you've all studied diligently over the next few weeks the budget, and we'll continue talking.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
And so, Dr. Chu, last thing on our agenda tonight, more policy, but again, this is coming at us from Desi.
Yeah. So, okay, so if you remember last year, I think the committee did a great job looking at the competency determination, which is something that we needed to have in place for the class of 25. So you looked at Westford Academy presented a chart that talked about what it would look like to meet that competency determination. You approved that. You even approved it before approving the graduation requirements, which we talked a great deal about. So it was just very proactive. And then Desi decided, after telling everybody that they had to do that, then they decided they would give us guidelines as to what it should be. And so that's what this is. So what they've come out and said is you need to have a competency determination policy, and it needs to meet these requirements. So what I've shared with all of you and what we have in the packet and what I need the policy subcommittee to consider, or the full committee to consider, is this narrative that meets the requirements that Desi has stated by breaking down specifically, not just taking it as a chart, but having a narrative that discusses what these requirements look like. And more importantly, having language around supporting students with special education, supporting students who might be late arrivals to the school district or to the state, and also students who are receiving English language learning support. So those specific areas weren't captured in the chart that we had created. But this narrative merely outlines what that chart said. And then it addresses those concerns that Desi said we need to have. Now, the fun part of this is that we have to have this, and it really needs to be approved before December 31st of this year. Today, Desi released their draft report about the new future of the graduation requirements, and the final report will come out in June 2026, which will change all of this. Because one of the things that they've come up with in their report is something that Courtney started to talk about, to bring this whole thing full circle and take us back to MCAS, is, if you remember, the voters said MCAS can't be used, right? So now Desi, this I could get myself in trouble, but I'll still say it. Desi is now saying that, well, no, but we believe that some assessment should be used. So every district within their recommendations will have to use end of course assessments
UOC.
for certain courses that will be developed by the state and graded by the state.
Sounds familiar.
Doesn't it though?
MCAS 2.0.
But it won't be MCAS. It'll be specific to end of course assessments, and they'll just pick which ones and they'll develop that. So that means that I'm going to come back to you within a year's time with new language that you need to address, but that's why I kind of share that with you right now, like just showing hey, this is, we're all kind of in this spinning wheel.
I think we kind of always knew,
Yeah.
I mean, when they were putting together that working group, that,
Yeah.
this was a.
And I
they
appreciate,
started
I
to-
read the report, I appreciate a lot of things that they said in it, I appreciate their connection to, leaning into, right now they address that Mass Core is a recommendation, it's not a requirement, well, they're saying maybe it should be a requirement. They talk about the data of, where that exists and where it doesn't. They talk about the benefits of local capstones and portfolios.
Yep.
So while there might be end of course assessments that the state will determine, develop, grade, and assess, then the local districts would need to have portfolios or capstones that might be, the language of those requirements will be developed by the state, but they will be locally assessed.
Yep. Yep. And just the thought in my head was, on top of everything else that our curriculum coordinators and our administrators and teachers are doing, but I would imagine that maybe at department levels, they're thinking about some of those things that the state might want to see.
Mhm.
Like what sort of skills, what sort of artifacts,
Right. Right.
that would go into a capstone or
Right.
portfolio or something like that.
And they're
So-
talking about the profile of a graduate.
Yeah.
That's something, as a district, part of our next strategic plan,
Mhm.
I anticipate we'll be looking at the portrait of a learner.
Yep.
Like, what does it mean to, what do we want for all of our students, not just the graduate, but all of our students? And so I feel like that is connected to the work that we want to be doing. Taking us back to the competency determination, I guess my question for you as the chair of the policy subcommittee and the chair of the school committee is,
Can we do this?
we do need this to be
Yeah.
submitted and approved before December 31st. I don't know if you want to consider, because it's,
We have a
You have-
policy for this.
I know you do.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, that's why I would give this to you. I would say we
We
can
have a
certainly
lever.
talk. I'd be happy to answer questions about it either now or even on the 15th.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you might consider changing your timeline, your typical policy timeline,
Yeah,
because this is something, again,
yeah. I think
that's being given to us.
because as well that we know we're going to come back to it
Yep.
too. This might just be a bit of a box ticking exercise, knowing that there's a further work to be done. Policy is set to meet on Wednesday, and I know we can, have a quick. I've read through it. There's nothing jumping out at me. What did kind of come across my mind was we have our competency determination within our graduation requirements, but this feels very meaty and should be a standalone policy in itself. So maybe what we might have to do is also consider just adding a link, cross-referencing, a slight tweak to our graduation requirements too. But we do have in P7302 an adoption of policies where it says the school committee may amend what is the above sequence, which is our typical 3 meetings, or shorten the public comment period to address an emergency or urgent need upon a 2/3 vote of the school committee. So what we could propose tonight is that we could take the vote to shorten the sequence of events, and that we would potentially plan to vote on the 15th. So we're not bringing anybody back in by December 31st to kind of adopt the language. Policy would do any tweaking and stuff on Wednesday and share it, I think, after that. So everybody would have about a week and a half we could also potentially put it up for a short public comment period as well, even if it's just for 5 business days, and that we could bring a draft on the 15th that we could vote on, knowing that we're coming back.
Yeah, and I think to tag on to that, basically what you just said, the already approved graduation requirements,
Yeah.
which has the competency determination in it, this does not change that.
No,
It does, this actually is only.
it expands it.
It's expansive. It's only
expansive, yeah.
creating more language
Yeah.
that's talking about what the appeal process is. I didn't mention that earlier when I talked about that. That's something you had to have in there. Is if someone wanted to appeal it, and if somebody had previously not received a diploma because of the competency determination connected to MCAS, what is their avenue? And that's listed in here too. But it doesn't actually change what that chart was that was already approved by you as what our competency determination was.
Yeah.
So it's really like an addendum
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah. Quick question, have leadership, curriculum coordinators they've had a look at this?
They all helped us look at it.
Fantastic.
We did not meet in person. This was the beauty of Google Docs. And
Awesome.
everyone was like, wait, can you read this? Can you read that? Can you read
Brilliant.
this?
So you've already got that input.
Yep.
So really,
Motion to
There we go.
reduce the timing for the competency determination to 2 readings and voting on December 15th?
it wouldn't
Is that
be.
the right motion?
Would be,
Technically, this isn't a first reading, I don't think, because, so we would be shortening it to,
Motion to condense the timeline so that the competency determination policy is voted on December 15th.
Or do you just want to waive it?
waive
Do
the.
you want to actually reduce it, or would you be waiving that policy? This is where we need a lawyer.
Where's Sean when you need him? We can amend the above sequence, so we're not waiving the policy entirely, we're just, because we are going to still do some of the public comment, so.
Amend the sequence to vote at the first reading on December 15th.
Exactly, and shorten
motion.
the public comment.
Shorten the public comment to 5 business days.
Okay.
For this.
For the
For the-
competency
for the
You don't want to
determination
necessarily
policy.
change.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying you
For
might
the,
want to
for
waive it, but I
the,
think you're right.
specifically
Yeah.
for the competency determination policy.
Policy.
Okay, so you want that again?
Yeah.
There we go.
So, motion to amend the period to vote on the competency determination policy at the first reading on December 15th with a 5-day public comment period.
There we go. You got it. Thanks, Larry. So this has to be a 2/3 majority, so all in favor? We've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a nay.
Just don't love the idea of not giving people enough time to look at it, but.
Okay, so that's a 5-1. My math suggests that's still a 2/3 majority. Okay. We'll have that for you on the 15th.
Thank you.
No problem. And with that, Shayna,
Motion to adjourn.
there we go.
seconded.
All in favor? Aye.